Somewhere, at some point, a human being ate the first cooked meal in history. There was no recipe, nobody watching, and no way for that person to know they were doing anything unusual. And for a long time, it looked like we would never have any idea what was on the menu. We do now. And the answer is not what most people picture. Start with why this question is worth asking at all, because it sounds like trivia, and it really is not. Raw food is expensive, not in money, in time. A chimpanzee spends something like 5 or 6 hours a day chewing. That is not eating, that is chewing, because raw plants and raw meat resist you. Your jaw has to do the work that a fire would otherwise do for you. Cooking does that work in advance. Heat gelatinizes starch and unravels protein, which means your gut extracts more energy from the same food for less effort. It also kills a good proportion of whatever was living in it. The primatologist Richard Wrangham built an entire theory on this, laid out in his book Catching Fire in 2009. His argument is that cooking is not a nice extra that humans picked up. It is the thing that made the modern human body possible. Cooked food allowed a shorter gut, and a shorter gut freed up the energy budget for a bigger brain, and you can see both changes appearing in Homo erectus, getting on for 2 million years ago. Our chewing time collapsed. Modern humans spend under an hour a day at it. Our teeth got smaller, our jaw muscles got weaker, and our guts got shorter. We are, in a very literal sense, an animal that is built on the assumption that something else has already done part of the digesting. So the question becomes, when did it actually start, and what went on the fire first? And here is the problem. Fire is a nightmare to find archaeologically. A hearth is just a patch of ground that got hot once, and 500,000 years of weather is very good at erasing patches of ground. The oldest serious claims are genuinely old. At Wonderwerk Cave in South Africa, sediments about 1 million years old contain burnt bone fragments and ash from plant material, deep inside the cave where a wildfire could not easily reach. It is good evidence for fire being used in a living space. It is not evidence of a meal. The picture gets much clearer at a site in Israel called Gesher Benot Yaaqov, on the shore of an ancient lake, about 780,000 years old. There, archaeologists found burnt flint clustered in specific spots rather than scattered, which is what you would expect from repeated fires in the same place. Not one accident, a hearth used again and again. They also found burnt seeds, burnt wood, and the remains of fish. And in 2022, a team published the result that actually answers our question. They looked at fish teeth from that site, specifically the enamel, using a technique that reads the crystal structure. Enamel changes in a measurable way when it is heated, and it changes differently depending on how hot it got. The teeth showed exposure to moderate heat. Not the intensity you get from a fish being dropped in a fire by accident, and not the signature of a fish that simply burned. The pattern is consistent with controlled cooking. The species was a large carp, and there were a lot of them, so the oldest direct evidence we have of a specific food being cooked anywhere in the world is fish. 780,000 years ago, on a lake shore, somebody cooked carp. Now I want to be careful here because there is a difference between the oldest evidence and the first time it happened. Fish preserve well in lake sediment, teeth preserve especially well, and enamel keeps the record of heat. Roots and tubers, which many researchers think were the real staple, mostly rot and vanish. If somebody buried a wild tuber in hot ash 300,000 years earlier, we would almost certainly never know. So the honest version is this. The first cooked thing was probably a plant, and it left no trace. The first cooked thing we can actually prove was a fish. And when you think about it for a second, the fish makes a lot of sense. A large mammal is a whole project. You have to find it, kill it, and process it, and then you are standing next to a pile of meat with limited daylight. A fish in shallow water is the opposite. It is slow to escape in the shallows, it is small enough to handle, it cooks through in minutes, and a lakeshore is exactly the kind of place people camped, because that is where the water and the animals are. There is one more thing that changed, and it might matter more than the calories. A fire is a fixed point. Raw food you can eat as you walk, alone, in the moment you find it. Cooked food cannot work like that. Somebody has to bring the food back to the fire, somebody has to keep the fire alive, and then everybody has to be in the same place at the same time to eat. That is a scheduled meeting. It might be the first one our species ever had. Wrangham has argued that this is where a great deal of human social structure begins, including who does which work and who eats first, which means the answer to the question is a little bigger than a menu. The first thing we cooked, as far as anyone can prove, was a carp on a lake shore in the Middle East nearly 800,000 years ago. And what came out of that fire was not only a softer dinner, it was a smaller jaw, a shorter gut, a larger brain, and the strange new habit of everybody sitting down together in one place at the end of the day. We still do it. We just call it dinner.